What's going on, Lions fans? Welcome to the Pride of Detroit YouTube channel. My name is Miko, and this is your go-to place for all things Lions related. That includes news, updates, analysis, and a whole bunch of other things. Today, we are going to be once again continuing our Lions roster preview series. This is a series that we initially kicked off on the prideofdetroit.com website, where we are basically going through the roster and highlighting specific players, not just starters, but even role players and players that are probably new to the team, and looking at what some of the expectations were for them going into last season, as well as how they performed through the actual season, and then looking ahead to what we think that they may be able to do in 2025. I highly recommend that you guys check out this series over on the website, because that is where you're going to find a larger amount of players that we've covered to this point. Guys like Malcolm Rodriguez, Dan Skipper, and so many others. And not to mention, though, we are still covering some of those players over here on the YouTube channel. We've covered Jared Goff, we've covered Terrion Arnold, and today, if you clicked on this video, you know that we are going to be covering one half of one of the best safety duos in the NFL, arguably the best safety duo if we are asking just my opinion alone, and that is going to be focused on our guy Brian Branch, who is going into his third season in the NFL. And when we talk about BB, I think when you talk about him, whether it's like locally or nationally, he's definitely starting to get that recognition as being not just, a good secondary player, but one of the best at his position. And I think going into 2025, this could potentially be the year where we really see him break out and start to really get that true acknowledgement, not just in conversation, not just on debate shows or things like that, but with some actual like awards and all pro nods and things like that. But before we get into all of that, we got to take, again, a look back at what some of the expectations were for Brian Branch going into the 2024 season. And when we talk about expectation, I think they were at a pretty high level. Even though going into last season, should I say, Brian Branch was making a transition. He had came in as a rookie playing specifically the slot position for the Lions and doing a lot of different things, covering, playing run defense, blitzing here and there. And the Lions saw what they saw from him was extremely impressive, to the point where going into his second season, after the Lions decided to part ways with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, they decided to start to move Brian Branch primarily to that other safety role opposite Kerby Joseph. And for them, they saw it as an opportunity for Brian Branch to, one, be on the field much more frequently, and also to give him more opportunities to make plays. So that's a really unique thing to say, because obviously if you're talking about slot corner versus safety, slot corner is much closer to the line of scrimmage and you would think would have more opportunities to make plays. But Brian Branch is not just someone who is, penciled in at playing run defense or covering the short game in the passing game. He is someone that can truly do it all. And that were some of the expectations for Brian Branch going into the season. In fact, defensive assistant Jim O'Neill had this to say about Brian Branch last offseason. He's the type of player you want to see out there on all three downs. So we're going to push him to that. And that's exactly what they did. Brian Branch went into the offseason in a pretty tough, I guess we can debate whether or not it was a tough camp battle or not. But the Lions did at the time have Ifeatu Melifonwu, who also had a pretty good 2023 season as well, getting to play some slot or getting a chance to play some safety snaps as well. But was kind of the revolving door with Iffy. He did struggle with some injuries. And on top of that, Brian Branch was excelling at a very high level, truly being able to make that transition from slot to the safety position. And that is essentially what allowed him to win that starting position opposite Kerby Joseph. And the rest from there, when we start to look at 2024, it shows in every single game that he played in. Brian Branch played in 16 games for the entire season. He did miss one game, which was the Monday Night Football game against the Seattle Seahawks due to an illness. But outside of that, BB was absolutely outstanding. We're talking about a guy that was able to rack up 16 pass breakups, 109 tackles, 4 interceptions, 1 forced fumble, and 1 sack. He was literally stuffing the stat sheet for the Lions and really was being that other equal half to the things that Kerby Joseph was doing that got him an all-pro nod for that season. And then if you were to take things over to PFF, BB's grades are still pretty impressive. He scored a 77.6 overall, which had him 17th among safeties. He had a 90 run defense grade, which was first among safeties. And then he had a 70 coverage grade, which is a little surprising considering how well I believe he played in coverage, especially when you start to talk about 16 pass breakups and 4 interceptions. His coverage grade had him at 32nd amongst safeties. So there is definitely room for growth in Brian Branch's game, but it's hard to ignore the fact that when he is on the field, whether that defense was at full strength or not, he was still an impact player for the Lions all of last season and was a true difference maker on the back end of that defense. And with that said, that kind of leads me into the 2025 outlook for Brian Branch, which is I am very much in the belief that BB is on the cusp of making an all-pro team. You look at how talented he is and his ability to literally match up in a number of different ways, in that secondary, whether it's zone coverage, whether it's man coverage, whether you're asking him to blitz, whether you're asking him to fill in on the run game. There has been very few times when BB has been out there in both his rookie year and now going into his third year, or at least last year being his second year, where he ever looked outmatched, where he ever looked like he wasn't truly comfortable. And it really continues to boggle, I think, a lot of people's mind on how a guy that is playing at such a high level was ever able to slip to the second round in the first place. Brian Branch continues to prove every team that looked over him wrong in the way that he plays the game at such a high level. He's not afraid to get in there to deliver big hits. He's not afraid to go out there and play in space and be a guy that can make plays in the passing game in terms of creating turnovers or things of that nature. He is absolutely really rising to the level of being a leader in that secondary. And when you put him next to Kirby Joseph, another guy that teams are going to have to be wary of, when you have two guys that are essentially accounting for 10 plus interceptions, as a tandem, that is going to really be something that a lot of opposing offenses are going to have to be mindful of. But like I said, Brian Branch is multifaceted. He is someone that can literally, impact the game from so many different areas, whether you're talking about, again, him being able to roam out in space and be able to make plays in the passing game, or if you decide to blitz him, if you decide to play a little bit of matchup, type of things with him in coverage where he's being able to cover tight ends or running backs. He's shown that ability. And so that's why going into 2025, I do think he's on the cusp of getting that recognition. And I think you're going to see a player that is very much focused on going out there and creating even more plays. It was just a couple days ago that Brian Branch was talking to some media outlets and even saying that he believes that this defense is going to be even better now that they're healthier, now that they know what it's like to go through a season where you're riddled with injuries and you're trying to, plug holes with practice squad players or players that you're just signing off the street. That he believes has helped reinforce this defense as a whole. And I think for him personally, getting snubbed last year and not necessarily getting the recognition that he probably deserved in terms of getting an all-pro selection is something that's going to definitely, stick with him going into 2025. It's also worth noting that Brian Branch did get a Pro Bowl selection, though. While he wasn't acknowledged for, as an all-pro, he did get a Pro Bowl nod, and that's his first in a very young career where I think we're going to see this more consistently from him going throughout the rest of the season. So for me, I expect the Lions to continue to do what they started doing in 2024 with him, which is trying to keep him on the field as much as possible and using him in a variety of ways, especially now that you have Amik Robertson playing the slot position. Like I mentioned before, you obviously have Kirby who can do just about anything when it comes down to covering the back end. You reinforce that secondary by getting DJ Reed. Terrion is hopefully going to continue to make that jump in his second year in the NFL. Hopefully, if everyone else is playing very well in the secondary, and if your defensive line is able to stay healthy now that you have Aiden Hutchinson, maybe that frees you up a little bit more to use Brian Branch in so many more dynamic ways. Maybe you can afford to blitz him a little bit more. Maybe you can afford to just try and get really creative with him because he is so much more than just your run-of-the-mill safety. And I think in 2025, we're really going to see that be put on display in a way that has him start to rise up the ranks as being recognized as one of the top safeties in the NFL. Of course, it's worth keeping in mind that the Lions do have a new defensive coordinator in Kelvin Shepard. And so we'll once again have to see how Shep decides to deploy BB and other members of this defense. But Shep is very much, been brought up right under Aaron Glenn. So it's not going to surprise me if we see him still try to do some of the same things. And Shep is someone that is also very, familiar with what each of these players are capable of doing. And I think he's going to follow the same type of lead that Dan Campbell has set, which is like you want to have your best best players being put in position to make plays. And Brian Branch, to me, is one of the top players on this defense that you absolutely need to be making sure that you're finding ways of helping him be impactful in the game, whether that's the pass game, whether that's the run game, whether you're blitzing him, whether you're just having him be, sound in run defense, whatever the case may be. Brian Branch needs to be a key focus of this defense. And that's something that I expect Kelvin Shepard and Dan Campbell to do going into his third season. And I think we're really going to see an even better player than we've seen the last 2 years, which, I'll be completely honest, sounds crazy saying it, seeing the trajectory that he's been on so early in his career. But like always, guys, those are just my opinions on the matter. I would love to hear from those of you in the comment section below. What do you think is in store for Brian Branch going into his third season in the NFL? Do you think we'll finally see him crack that upper echelon in terms of making it all pro and being truly recognized as one of the best safeties in the NFL? Or do you think that there's still some ground that Brian Branch needs to make up in his game in order to actually reach that level? Also, like I mentioned at the top of this video, I highly encourage you guys to check out the rest of this series, the rest of this Lions roster preview series that we have over on prideofdetroit.com. We are covering so many different players by so many other members of the staff here that I would hate for you to miss out on some really good information about players that you may not have considered or even thought about when it comes down to how they may be able to impact this roster going forward. So again, there's a link in the description that'll take you over to the Pride of Detroit website. We've literally been uploading one of these just about every day. So all you have to do is probably click on the latest one, and that'll start you down a rabbit hole so that you can find all of the other roster previews that we've done to this point. And like always, if you want to stay locked into the video content that we're doing over here on YouTube, all you got to do is hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell. Those things are going to help out the channel immensely, but it makes it that much easier for you to find our content in the near future or whenever we decide to upload something new or whenever we go live over here on YouTube. So with all that said, I'm Miko. Thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you guys in the next one.